Our people gonna pray.
Our people gonna pray. Thank you.
In this revolution, there will be more. Thank you. It's worth mentioning that Joe Biden is going to be the next president of the United States. We're done with 45, we're moving on to 46. It's easy to be despondent because we thought there was going to be a landslide. Maybe we had higher hopes about the last throes of white supremacy, but we've won this election, and the only way we don't get the White House is if they steal it. So we need to stay positive. We need to be clear that the message is this country's had enough of that man in the White House. That's our house, the people's house. That's nuestra casa, no es suyo. So we're going to get rid of him, and we're going to have Joe Biden and Vice President Harris starting on, I believe, January the 20th. But it's up to us to be diligent because we heard last night they're still going to try and steal the election. The election's not over until every vote is counted. I'd like to introduce Lillian Myers from the Sunrise Movement, and she's going to come and read a poem for us. Lillian, excuse me.
Hi everybody, I'm Lillian of the Sunrise Movement. Woo! Alright, I'm going to read three short poems for you all. The first one is by our local poet Alice Walker. Her book Hard Times Require Furious Dancing.
You're a Surge, right? Yeah. Sure, I recognize you.
Calling all grandmothers. Calling all grandmothers. We have to live differently, or we will die in the same old ways. Therefore, I am calling all grandmothers everywhere on the planet to rise and take your place in the leadership of the world. Come out of the kitchen, out of the fields, out of the beauty parlors, out of the television. Step forward and assume the role for which you were created, to lead humanity to health, happiness, and sanity. I call on all grandmothers of Earth and every person who possesses the grandmother's spirit of respect for life and protection of the young to rise and to lead. The life of our species depends on it, and I call on all men of Earth to gracefully and gratefully stand aside and let them let us do so. Woo! Calling All Grandmothers by Alice Walker. And as we are in this period of waiting, another local poet, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, wrote the poem I Am Waiting in his abridged version. I am waiting for the rebirth of wonder. I am waiting for someone to really discover America and wail. I am waiting for the American eagle to spread its wings and straighten up and fly right. I am waiting for the age of anxiety to drop dead. And I am waiting for the war to be fought, which will make the world safe for anarchy. I am waiting for the final withering away of all governments, and I am perpetually waiting for the rebirth of wonder. I am waiting for the meek to be blessed and inherit the earth without taxes. I am waiting for the forests and the animals to reclaim the earth as theirs. And I am waiting for a devised way to destroy all nationalisms without killing anybody. And I am waiting for lovers and weepers to lie down together again in a new rebirth of wonder. I am waiting for the day that maketh all things clear. And I am waiting for retribution. I am waiting for Alice in Wonderland to retransmit to me her total dream of innocence. And I am waiting for Aphrodite to grow live arms at a final disarmament conference in a new birth of wonder. I Am Waiting by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Our last brief piece is by Emily Dickinson. Hope is a thing with feathers. Hope is a thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. The sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash this little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chilliest land, and in the strangest sea, yet never in extremity has it asked a cloud. Hope is a thing that is Power to the people, Sunrise Movement. All right, thank you all so much.
William Myers, Sunrise Movement, not sunset, sunrise.
I'll take the...
We have Peter, Indivisible, has a message for us.
Thank you.
He's busy out here wearing yellow vest, but we have a recorded message from Peter about counting every vote. Translate this. I'm always reminded of the words of the great Joe Strummer, the late great Joe Strummer, who said, "Kick over the wall, cause governments to fall. How can you refuse it? Let fury have the hour. Anger can be power. Do you know that you can use it? In these days of evil presidentes working for the clampdown, lately one or two have fully paid their due for working for the clampdown. That man is paying his due for working for the clampdown. None of us are or will be working for the clampdown, so thank you for coming." Angela, I'm just going to run you up a little bit. Oh, Peter is ready first. This is virtual Peter.
Comment. The election didn't end last night. Voting ended, and now we are in the count. And it will take time, and we won't know the real result until all the votes are counted. That is why we need to count every vote. Trump and the Republican Party are trying to discredit ballots that arrived after Election Day. He's trying to claim that legitimate ballots are a form of fraud so he can discredit the results. That is why we need to protect the results. What Trump and the Republicans want to achieve has a name, and that name is coup. They want to cheat and keep Trump in power without the consent of the government. That is a coup. We need to name that to understand the stakes. To stop a coup, you need a non-violent movement that shows the people's non-consent and the people's power. We are a non-violent movement. We do not consent, and we have power. People power can sometimes seem like a meaningless slogan. People power doesn't exist without people knowing and exerting their power. That starts with you. What I want you all to do, if you haven't already, is start building your power. Learn organizing skills. Learn how to talk about politics in a way that reaches people and changes minds. Learn how to safely and effectively organize coworkers into a coalition. Build power in your workplace. If you're not already in a union, start building one. Learn about different forms of mutual aid. Learn about mutual aid programs in your area that you can get involved in. If you have medical skills, learn how to be a street vendor. Learn how to participate in nonviolent direct action. These tools complement and reinforce each other, and they are the pieces of a people's movement that holds the power to stop a coup. We demand democracy, and we will take that demand to the streets. We will stop Trump from cheating, and we will build the power to win the fight for democracy in this country. And it starts with you. Are you ready? Are you ready? All right, let's get started.
How is everybody today? I know the people in Washington, D.C. cannot hear you. How are you feeling? I want to know something. I want you guys to help me out with this, okay? I need to know, what does democracy look like? Tell me what democracy looks like. Tell me what democracy looks like. Tell me what democracy looks like. What does democracy look like? You guys in the back, I don't see here anything. Tell me what democracy looks like. Tell us what democracy looks like. What does democracy look like? Good job, you guys. I hope that helped produce some energy. Something else I want to hear about. When democracy is under attack, what do we do? When democracy is under attack, what do we do? When democracy is under attack, what do we do? 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 When our votes are under attack, what do we do? When our votes are under attack, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? By the way, thanks for coming out. It's kind of hard to do this with a mask. We're doing it. Another thing, when our next new president is under attack, what do we do? When our next new president is under attack, what do we do? When our next new president is under attack, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? What are you going to do? And you in the back, what are you going to do? Are you going to stand up and fight back? When our next vice president is under attack, what are you going to do? Stand up, fight back. 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 Thank you guys. I hope that helped release some of this pent-up energy. Did it? Okay. See you next time.
Thanks, Angela.
Hey, how you doing? Good.
Next up, actually, we have a request for social distancing. That's a bit too much social distancing on that side. Could you guys move around a bit? So we can move on this side. Then you'd be on the left, which seems appropriate to me. Next up, we have Patrick, who is the co-chair of DSA San Francisco Labor Organizing Committee and a bartender production worker at Anchor Brewing. This is Patrick. Test it.
I've been doing a lot of meetings over the computer, so this is the first time in a long time I'm actually seeing real people. So bear with me. Hey, what's up, y'all? I'm Patrick, as he said. I work at Anchor Brewing Company, obviously. I'm also one of the leaders of the labor organizing committee for DSA, San Francisco. So I'm going to be talking about the labor movement, how we're intertwined with democracy, and how we challenge the status quo by being in a union. So first off, I want to talk a little bit about the ILWU. We're one of the last, we're one of the last leftist unions left in this country. We have a huge amount of history in the Bay Area. Even right behind us is Harry Bridges Plaza, our founder. Local 6, which is a local that we're a part of, was part of the warehouse, like the move inland to get warehouses into the ILWU. Straight up, we were a monumental part of the labor movement with the 1934 general strike. If you're not aware of that, that's when we lost six rank and file members to the brutal police dictatorship that we still see today. I want to be clear. Police should not be part of unions. They're always on the other side of the picket line. And they've killed 6 of our past members. So I'll go a little bit happy now with Anchor Union. We were the first craft brewery in the country. And one of the first to actually unionize. We've been a beacon of hope with other service industries and craft breweries around the country, and have started a movement to push for a more democratized industry. A few of the examples that we've gotten just at Anchor Union is we've gotten our workers hazard pay, which they weren't very happy about. We always have a seat at the table, and we're annoying as hell. We have training manuals, which you think we would have had, but now we have them now because of our union. We got pay bumps of about 20 to 30%, so nobody's at minimum wage anymore. And we got accountability with grievances and unfair labor practices, which is pretty much like writing up your management, which I've wanted to do since I was in high school. So with DSASF, we're a big tent organization. We're working with the labor committee. We're working towards more democratically unionized workplaces to give the working class a voice in a city that is ever changing and forever giving breaks to the capitalist ruling class. Join us and be part of the movement to take back the means of your own labor. Right over there. So with the future of the labor, Anchor and Torque Team were only the tip of the iceberg of workers realizing we need to take back our means of their labor. We used to be a city where we had a majority of the bar industry unionized back in the day, probably before I was born. But COVID-19 has put a magnifying glass on the injustices that we all experience every day. The bosses are not on our side. They only have the focus of capital in their eyes, and we are the sacrificial lambs to their profit. We have to challenge them, and we need to take back control. If it was not for us, they would not have a business. So why is a labor organizer here to talk to you during an election response? That's because we all, as workers, may have a role to play depending on what plays out over the next couple of weeks. In countries like Bolivia and Chile, labor unions use their collective power to coordinate strikes against coups and authoritarianism in their countries. To be clear, we're not calling for a general strike at this point, but if we're serious about opposing the threat of authoritarianism as Trump and his cronies keep pushing us further from democratic principles, we'll have to start thinking about how to harness our collective power to stand against it. And our labor is one of those most valuable resources. So also, if anybody wants to join a union, definitely come talk to us. But just some clear examples of what to expect. 2 big things. Bosses and their lawyers that they use, and then relationships. So with the bosses and lawyers, they always have the same playbook, and it's to divide us as workers. They're horrible people that get paid a whole bunch of money to bust unions and sit there for business rights. The best way to combat this is being truthful with your coworkers, being honest and talking to them as your fellow friend. People will be scared, and that is okay. You need to be strong with your vigilance and make sure you're their rock. Sorry. So with relationship building, this is the most important thing to keep in mind. You need to build a relationship of trust with your coworkers. You will cause some friction, which is also okay. People are sometimes reluctant to change, and you might have a few people that are just comfortable with where they are. Don't fret about this. Just keep an open mind and see if you can relate to how bad the employer has been treating them and find some common ground. We've even had a few anti-union co-workers at Anchor. that have been working there decades, that have seen multiple changes in ownership. And this was tough to come. But when we signed our contract, they came around and wanted us to just know that we should take care of it. And we're gonna do that. We're great friends now, and it's almost as if those arguments and controversies never even happened. The relationship of honesty and trust are incredibly important when you start talking about unions. So I want to close out real quick and say that regardless of who will win the election, we will always be in the fight for our labor rights until we have a class-conscious working class. We need to take back the means of our labor, democratize our workplaces, so we can have the opportunity to take back what is rightfully ours. And we make delicious union-made beer.
Thank you, Patrick, from BSA SF. Right now, I'd like to introduce a friend of ours, a very wonderful singer, Diana Gameros. Come on, Diana Gameros! Thank you.
Hola, buenas tardes. Hello. I am here on behalf of the immigrant community, on behalf of my undocumented fellow men and women, to say thank you to those of you who voted. Thank you for casting your vote. Thank you for raising your voice for those of us who cannot vote yet. Thank you for keeping in mind, while you voted, keeping in mind the lives and the struggles of those who have been systematically oppressed. I'm here to say thank you, and I am also here to remind you, to remind us that this doesn't end with our vote. The labor continues. May we have the strength, the power, but above all, the love to continue to fight for those who are most vulnerable and to keep our democracy in mind, to keep our planet, the health of it in mind. Just love have an open door. Welcome, stranger, give us your tired and cold. All those in need, oh, dreamers, teach us to dream again. Oh, beautiful world.
of security and grabbed our humanity. Can I leave it now? Can I leave it now? Over what a beautiful world. What a beautiful world. Muchas gracias. The work continues, my friends. Thank you so much.
Gracias, Diana. Worth mentioning that Joe Biden won Wisconsin and Michigan. Joe Biden's going to win Nevada in the morning, and that means he's going to win the Electoral College. When he wins the Electoral College, that means the Democrats win the Electoral College and the popular vote. Again. Except this time we get to take the White House as well. And we need to work for a day when winning the popular vote means you win an election like you do in every other democratic country in the world. Let's get rid of the last vestiges of slavery and white supremacy. On that note, next speaker I'd like to invite up Faye on Fighting for Democracy Beyond the Ballot Box. And Faye she is the co-chair of DSA SF.
Hello, everyone. Hello. I'm Faye, like I was just introduced, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the San Francisco chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. It's so great to see every one of you. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to come out here. We're here, so you probably already know. Democracy is defended in the streets. We have come out today to reject the President's premature victory declaration and to demand that every vote be counted. But even before last night, this election has exposed in greater detail the fissures that have always existed within our political system. Whatever the results, election season in America means scores of stories about people mysteriously dropped off of voting rolls, hours-long waits at polling places, and lawsuits over discounted ballots. This year, along with a pandemic and a drastic uptick in early and mail-in voting, the Trump administration has attempted to capitalize on these circumstances to declare an early, undemocratic victory. The fact that unelected bodies like the Supreme Court and the Electoral College play such a prominent role in elections in the United States, sometimes against the clear will of the people, and allow for such plotting and disenfranchisement time after time is an affront to the ideal of democracy. But the threat to our democracy is not limited to the failures of our electoral system. We have lived through a summer and longer of protest and rebellion. And in city after city, we have seen local, state, and sometimes federal law enforcement violently crack down on peaceful demonstrations that are simply asking the government to stop killing its own citizens. People have disappeared off the streets, have been illegally detained, and lost their lives demanding justice for the racist police murders that terrorize Black communities. Our problems are much larger than just a few corrupt actors behaving badly. The institutions that dominate our lives at best enable the rising authoritarianism and fascist white supremacist violence we are seeing. And at worst, they actively encourage its rise. The Trump presidency has made this escalation increasingly visible here in the United States. but it began long ago. The sport behind the creation and expansion of these oppressive institutions has been, as some might say, bipartisan. The border camps were created and expanded under both Republican and Democratic control legislatures and presidencies. Obama continued Bush's forever wars and expanded the use of drone strikes against civilian targets. He was also in power when the Dakota pipeline tried to forcibly violate indigenous sovereignty, all for the sake of expediting the flow of fossil fuels. After the 2008 financial crisis, he supported legislation that propped up crooked, mismanaged banks at our expense. I am encouraged that you are all out here today. It inspires me so much to see so many of you show up to protect everyone's voting rights. I believe it is absolutely vital that we demand that every vote be counted and that the people get to make their will known. However, we need to acknowledge that this is a response to a short-term problem. As necessary as it is, we will continue a cycle where we careen from one crisis to another if we are not willing to address the larger problem at the center of our political institutions. Let us state this simply and clearly. The United States has never been a legitimate democracy. Those of us here, we stand on stolen Ohlone land. This nation was founded on the genocide of indigenous peoples. This nation was founded on enslaved labor. The Constitution never intended to extend universal suffrage. It reserved voting for white men of a particular economic class. And its framers certainly could never have imagined the civic participation of the vast majority of us. And as much as that's changed since the nation's founding, we have to acknowledge that our democracy was built upon these exclusions, and that our political institutions still draw their authority from this document's understanding of liberty and justice for the few. Even now, individual wealth can corrupt our democracy. One person or one corporation can use money to have a bigger say in our democracy than they should ever have. We have Uber and Lyft spend exorbitant amounts of money to fight against labor protections instead of using that money to just pay their workers.
Oh, for the newspaper?
Are you interested in socialism
Here
and
in the
feminism?
city, we saw $3 million spent on our local races from outside Republican interests. We cannot have a functioning democracy so long as capital holds such great power in our society. We come to you as democratic socialists because we believe that there is no democracy without socialism. We must dismantle the capitalist hold over our political system. We must create a world where it is easy not only to vote, but to have the freedom and time and access to participate in politics so that everyone can have a say in how our society is shaped. We must revolt against this world where people have to take time off or sometimes risk losing their jobs outright to vote. We must revolt against this world where student and medical debt are forcing people to work themselves ragged just to keep up. We must revolt against this world where fossil fuel companies would rather continue poisoning us and destroying the world around us than risk hurting their own profits. Only then will we have a democracy where all our voices are heard equally. The task before us is great. While being out here today is what we can do most immediately to make it clear to those in power that we demand that every vote be counted, we must also reckon with our nation's violent history if we want to build a true democracy. We must acknowledge that the political system a few men created 250 years ago was never meant for most of us. We must acknowledge that that system is built upon the exploitation of the many, both within and outside of this country, to serve the few. We must reject the fairy tales of U.S. exceptionalism and the illusion of liberty those stories have sold us. We must band together and recognize that we share far more with ordinary people of every nation, rather than the oligarchs who run our own. The movements in Chile and Bolivia have shown us the power of the organized working class, fighting on multiple fronts to win victory. Their struggles against the U.S. empire are a model and an inspiration for our own. More and more Americans are seeing that an empire based on exploiting the world similarly exploits themselves. So long as we live in such a society, we can never be free. And only by recognizing that these struggles are one and the same and learning their lessons can we be free ourselves. There's nothing stronger than ordinary people like you and me working together. All that money and power can't stop us when we organize ourselves, our workplaces, and our communities. We must imagine a more compassionate system and take up the work others have started to build it. I hope to see you in the streets, but I also hope you show up for your neighbors and your communities in whatever capacity you can. We must continue to build with each other beyond today. Let's measure up to the work we have inherited. A better world is possible. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Faye, and Democratic Socialists of America, SF. Worth bearing in mind, we've been here all afternoon, so I haven't been able to follow the news, but as of this morning, Joe Biden had nearly 3 million votes more than the other guy. And I'm sure you don't need to remind me that was the margin of victory or margin of defeat last time. But that was with 20 million votes still to come. And he already had the most votes for any American president in American history. With 20 million votes still to come, the majority of which will be Democratic votes. So we're looking at somewhere in the region of 70 to 80 million votes for Joe Biden, the next president of the United States. Joe Biden, the next president of the United States. So while we're mourning that we're not winning the Senate and there's not a landslide, let's not forget what this means. This means that the orange monster will no longer be in the people's house. It means that Senator Kamala Harris, a black Indian woman from Oakland, will be the next vice president of the United States. It means that William Barr soon will no longer be the Attorney General of Donald J. Trump. But we will have an Attorney General of the United States again. Hopefully one whose middle name is Q. Sally Yates. Sally Q. Yates would get my vote. So, we have some more friends of ours. We've been very lucky through the 4 years that we've been fighting the orange monster and the rising tide of fascism in this country. We've been very lucky to have a soundtrack provided by Emma's Revolution, Diana Gameros, and our friends from St. Gabriel's Celestial Brass Band. Now, these fine people are professional musicians, sorry about that, musicians who rely on their music, and they've lost in the region of $150,000 between them in bookings due to the coronavirus. So one thing we always do when they play for us, they bring a bucket and we pass the bucket around. And I do plead with you to put some money in the bucket for them. That's the condition of us being able to have them play here. They need to put food on the table. So thank you for coming, and they are going to entertain us. Thank you. St. Gabriel's Celestial Brass Band.
voted? Just raise your hand. Woo-hoo-hoo, nice. Who didn't vote? If you didn't vote, get out of here. No, it's a joke. So, I'm going to need to help release some more of this energy that we're feeling here. You can take your coasters and tuck it underneath your armpits for a minute, and I want you guys to clap twice like this. Don't you think my vote should count? Don't you think our votes should count? My vote! My vote! My vote! My vote! My vote! My vote! You can say it too, Mr. My vote! My vote! My vote! My vote! My vote should count! My vote should count! My vote should count! My vote should count! Your vote! Your vote! Your vote! Your vote! Your vote should count! Your vote should count! Your vote should count! Your vote should count! Our votes! Our votes! Our votes! Our votes! Our votes should count! Our votes should count! Our votes should count! Our votes should count! My vote! My vote! Your vote! Our vote! Our votes will count! Our votes will count! Our votes! Our votes! Our votes! Our votes! Thank you,
Thank you, Angela. Next up, Lisa Milos, Chilean human rights activist with 810org. Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Milos, and I'm Chilean American, San Francisco resident and rank and file member of the University of Professional and Technical Employees, CWA 9119. I'm speaking as a rank and file. I'm also speaking on behalf of our International Organization for Human Rights 1810, an organization in defense of human rights that was born as an answer to the state violence that was unleashed in Chile since October 18, 2019. Unjustified violence against anyone who is exercising his or her legitimate right to peaceful demonstration in response to the ever more profound injustices imposed by the neoliberal capitalist system in Chile. We must remember that the system was imposed upon Chile via bloody military coup on September 11th, 1973, financed by the CIA. We must also remember that a few years after this coup came a constitution that allowed for the privatization of our most basic rights, health, education, and has even privatized water. The military government of Pinochet governed jointly with the corporate interests of Chile's oligarchy and the international corporations. Unfortunately, the Piñera government now in power represents the same civic-military alliance. On October 18, 2019, high school students decided to protest a 30-cent subway fare hike and jumped the turnstiles. The police violence that ensued erupted into major protests throughout the entire country, something that only stopped temporarily as a result of the pandemic. The violence included 30 deaths and counting, thousands of cases of police brutality and even sexual assault, 460 cases of traumatic eye injury or blindness due to police pellets, and hundreds of cases of skin lesions from the use of sodium hydroxide in the water cannons. And now also more than 400 youth still in jail, even a year later, just for exercising the right to protest. The major slogan, the major cry continues to be, it's not 30 pesos, it's 30 years. And the people of Chile took to the streets in the millions demanding that Piñera resign. Why 30 years? Because it was 30 years since supposedly democracy had arrived to Chile with the end of the military dictatorship in 1990. So what happened? Neoliberalism happened. The forces of privatization took over, making it seem like Chile was one of the only countries in Latin America that was doing well. But at whose expense? Education became profit-driven, leaving the vast majority of Chileans with crippling student debt. Please tell me if any of this sounds familiar. Public health care became dismantled and defunded, leaving people on waiting lists whose names only show up at the top once they've already died, while those who can pay or get into debt to pay for medical care have access. Privatized retirement plans were imposed upon working people, where after contributing 35 years, workers and professionals such as teachers get retirements worth less than minimum wage. The only ones in Chile to have good public pensions are the military and the police. The level of corporate and institutional corruption led to several financial scandals that do not stop to this day. By the way, unionized workers around the country in the US are fighting to protect their public pensions from this same type of privatized retirement scams, just like my union was also fighting against the University of California during our last contract fight against the same privatized retirement system and against the same attempt to destroy our public pension. Why did people need to take to the streets to protest this inequality? In Chile, we had several quote-unquote socialist presidents after 1990. The problem is that none of these presidents, nor the political parties, whether they were in power or in the opposition, fixed the problem. The indigenous people in the south, the Mapuche, have been fighting against this corporate military alliance to protect their native forests from the forestry industry during the past 30 years and counting, while facing criminalization in jail, assassination, raids, and militarized communities by both the socialist and right-wing governments of Chile. Much like the black people in the United States suffered under the same situations under democratic rule as well. Public health, free education, water, clean environment, and a government free of corruption, especially free of violence, are all human rights. This past October 25th, Chileans voted almost 80% in favor of changing the Constitution from the one that was imposed upon us during the dictatorship into a Constitution drafted by 100% people, constituents elected directly from the electorate instead of by the politicians. But the fight is just beginning, because in many cases the agreement that was reached behind closed doors by the political parties themselves and by the subsequent congressional vote has tied the hands of this future constitutional convention by making it hard for those not linked to political parties, the grassroots organizers, the social justice warriors, the youth who started this movement, to participate fully. The agreement also places limits as to the scope of this constitutional convention, prohibiting it from interfering in any of the international agreements, such as the very privatization of water, among others. There's a false triumphalism in the US media regarding what the recent 80% victory means in Chile, because the fight is just beginning. As I look among you today, I see people who are deeply afraid that in the US we're seeing a rise of fascism, given the number of people that we see who voted for Trump. We are wringing our hands wondering how this could have happened. Well, for starters, we have been ignoring the fact that our votes are being purged, gerrymandered, and we rely on voting machines from the same companies that are in cahoots with the Republicans. Greg Palast has been investigating and reporting on this for 20 years since the Supreme Court decided in favor of Bush. At another level, and to the point of what I'm making, even within the Democratic Party, if there were a victory, if this is a victory, what does this mean for working people if the Democratic Party continues to represent the interests of its donors instead? What kind of difference does it make for a cashier in Wisconsin or a daycare worker in Detroit if they will be thrown onto the street because they can't pay their rent? What does it mean if it's taken so long to get the Democratic Party on board with the fight for 15, when now even that is not enough to survive? What does it mean that in the middle of a pandemic, the Democratic Party still refuses to support Medicare for all? This pandemic has made working people in this country, and especially essential workers, find commonality. Professional healthcare workers like myself, we're seeing commonality with the other essential workers, the field workers who feed us, the delivery drivers, the public transit workers. There's been more strikes in the past few years, many of them non-sanctioned by their own unions called wildcat strikes, than any time in the past 70 years. A general strike is what some unions are proposing if Trump tries to ignore the results and claim victory before the votes are counted. But if Biden wins, are we ready to fight for what all of us in this country really need? A true human rights platform that includes an overhaul of our electoral system to represent all of the people of this country. As a person of labor, I truly believe that we can't make any major change in this country unless we create a rank-and-file labor movement, not beholden to any of the two political parties. While we're fighting to protect our votes, will we also be ready to fight to protect the votes of the Bolivian people, which led to this mass party victory, even if with a Democrat in power? Or do only Americans deserve democracy and human rights? I'm asking this as a Chilean American from one 9/11 to another 9/11. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa Milos. Next up, Narisa, a Filipina activist.
You want a flamenco?
And friends.
Good afternoon. My name is Narissa. I'm with San Francisco Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines. We are here today in an unprecedented moment in U.S. history. A sitting president who is actively undermining the electoral process. I'm not sure if this is solace or a caution for us, but other countries have been here in similar situations before us. Other countries have seen civil liberties, due process, public and political institutions slip away into fascist authoritarian rule. As someone who has been organizing against the grave human rights abuses in the Philippines, our communities have known far too well the onslaught of fascist tactics. The Philippines is one of the most murderous nations for journalists, activists, and land defenders. But fascism does not always express itself in such extremes. In the Philippines, we've seen verbal threats by the president and permission of violence, the repression of opposition voices and undermining of press freedom, red tagging of activists and celebrities, the deterioration of the Supreme Court, and of course the normalization of brutality by police and military forces. The Philippines is a de facto colony of the U.S. The United States gives the Philippines the largest military aid package in the Asia-Pacific region. The fascist violence that has killed over 30,000 people in the war on drugs, that has terrorized landless and starving peasant farmers, that has forced the displacement of over 300,000 indigenous people in the southern part of the Philippines. All of that is funded by the U.S. We must highlight these atrocities and expose these attacks on the people. And the tragedy of this moment with the pandemic cannot be overstated for the people of the Philippines. As the country with the highest death toll in Asia, while the exported labor force of Filipino nurses and healthcare workers are disproportionately dying at a higher rate than their colleagues in the United States. It is not surprising then that the United States, with its funding of the Duterte regime, and many others like it around the world, is allowing fascism to rear its ugly head in the form of Donald Trump. Duterte and Trump are mirrors of each other. They lie and sow distrust amongst the people. They're macho chauvinists. They encourage violence against those who oppose their anti-people policies. And not surprisingly, Duterte and Trump have mutual admiration for one another. The U.S. has already entered dangerous territory, with protesters in Portland getting snatched into unmarked vans. PSL activists in Denver targeted and arrested on false charges for inciting riots at peaceful BLM protests. And cruel and deadly conditions in migrant concentration camps. So how do we stop a full-blown dictatorship? For every gross injustice, we must speak out and take action to challenge it. Mere hours after polls closed yesterday, Trump had already demanded to stop the vote, declared victory, and demanded intervention by the Supreme Court to take over state election processes. The coup attempt has already begun, albeit over Twitter. If you have cast your vote, I applaud your civic engagement. But let's not stop there. We must get up and act. We must build our organizations and work collectively to build people power. We must galvanize those who are anxious and concerned about these elections and about the future to work together to demand a just process and to work towards a better society. We must grow in the thousands and hundreds of thousands. We must continue to educate, organize, and mobilize, regardless of the victor of this election. Those of you who have voted, you can take that next step to engage yourself in political study, organize with other people, rally around issues that impact our communities, and encourage others to do the same. Let's continue to demand that every vote be counted before this election is decided. In a true democracy, every vote counts, not just the person seated at the highest position of power. Every vote must be counted. While what we are experiencing in this moment is frightening, we remind ourselves that fascist regimes and empires that have lasted longer than ours have crumbled in the past from the weight and might of people power. It is the masses that determine history, not the rulers. Let's learn from our struggles and continue to build solidarity across all nations and across all sectors. From the U.S. to the Philippines, long live international solidarity.
Thank you. Now this, bear this in mind, although we're not going to win the Senate apparently, if you see the Senate map in 2 years, we have 2 chances of pickups in 2 years and they have 2 chances to lose seats in 2 years. We have a very favourable map coming up. So all is not lost forever, we just have work to do. Emma's Revolution!
Are you feeling energized? You ready to work in solidarity, as our sister just said? We are union members. We're American Federation of Music. Do we have union members out there? Awesome. And the energizing means that we know that there's still work ahead, obviously, and I so appreciate Steve keeping us updated on the fact that when we go back to our regular organizing, the people that we're going to get to push back to are going to be Biden and Harris, so that we can actually make some headway on racial justice, climate justice. What do you think?
There's a new video that we put together that we started in January of last year, but it's just about ready. That will be out very soon, actually, of this song.
So this part for you, put out the fire, but you know, we're also not encouraging you to like sing all over each other, so you can dance it or something, move your signs or something.
Yes, do it COVID safely.
Put out the fire, our house
house is on fire. Put out the fire. Put out the fire. Put out the fire. Our house is on fire. We love you. We hear you. We're coming to change our ways, not later, but sooner. Right now, for your future, you can't wait. Put out the fire. Well, I can't wait. Put out the fire. I can't wait. Put out the fire. Our house is on fire. For our children. Put out the fire. And their children. Put out the fire. And their children. Put out the fire. Our house is on fire. For songbirds. For freedom. For the oceans and the waves. Not later, but sooner. Right now, for our future. Melting glaciers. Put out the fire. Rising seas. Put out the fire. Raging storms. Put out the fire. Our house is on fire. Drinking shoreline. Put out the fire. Sinking islands. Put out the fire. Growing shoreline. Put out the fire. Our house is on fire. Let trees live. Let trees grow. Let the snow fall where it may. Not later, but sooner. Right now, for the future. Right now, for the future. Right now, we are here to put out the fire. This is how we put out the fire. Time is now. We put out the fire. Our house is on fire.
Endless Revolution. I'd like to thank, this is another union crew, Sound Wizard, Bob and Sound Wizard. They've been there for us over and over and over again with the best sound system in town, so thank you very much. If Karima is here.
Hi, I'm going to be really short, but I want to say thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. I was amazed by all the speakers, and that really got me inspired. I'm Karima Lynch. I'm the Executive Director of the San Francisco Democratic Party. I'm here to speak on behalf of David Campos. He couldn't come, I'm sorry. So we just want to do a statement. We urgently demand that every ballot in America are counted for this election. It is so important. I can't emphasize enough. This year has been so hard for all of us. 2020, I bet we all want to be over with it, but we went through a health crisis. We went through an economy crisis where we saw millions of people getting laid off. We went through a racial crisis when we saw so much injustice. And now I see you here, it's bring me hope, and I'm like, we went through so much together. It's time for us to say every vote counts. We're not gonna give up, we're gonna stand up and fight until the end. And I know I'm kind of stressed out, looking at my phone every 2 seconds to update my file and see, you know, what is the result right now. And it's just so much anxiety. So I just want also to emphasize self-care for yourself. It's so stressful right now, but we're here, we're together, and we'll fight. Thank you so much, thank you.
How's everybody doing? Buenas tardes, de nuevo. This is a song from the Chilean people that talks about how everything changes. I believe that. I believe that if we put the work, if we put the love, if we work in unity, we can affect change. And I believe that that's what you were intending to do with your vote. I'm also here to remind us once again that our work does not end with the vote. The labor continues. We must stand guarded, and I trust that we will be, and that we will do it with love and with strength and with wisdom. But most importantly, keeping those who have been oppressed, systematically oppressed, in mind.
Cambia lo superficial, cambia también lo profundo, cambia el modo de pensar, cambia todo en este mundo, cambia el clima con los años, cambia el pastor su rebaño, y así como todo cambia, que yo cambie no es extraño. Cambia el más fino brillante, de mano en mano su brillo, cambia el nido el pajarillo, cambia el sentir un amante, cambia el rumbo el caminante, aunque esto le cause daño, y así como todo cambia, que yo cambie no es extraño. Cambia, todo cambia. Cambia, todo cambia. Sing it. Cambia, todo cambia. Cambia, todo cambia. Cambia el sol en su carrera, cuando la noche subsiste, cambia la planta y se viste de verde en la primavera, cambia el pelaje la fiera, cambia el cabello el anciano, y así como todo cambia, el recuerdo viene el dolor de mi pueblo viviente, y lo que cambió ayer tendrá que cambiar mañana, así como cambio yo en esta tierra lejana. Cambia, todo cambia. Cambia, todo cambia.
Standing up, keep going.
Is it ready?
Not yet.
Thank you, Emma's Revolution.
There you go.
Now, even the most privileged people feel the repression that includes, right? So we're all having to live with that. So now, it is not just important that we look to the leadership of the most impacted communities as we fight, because we must fight. We must fight to make every vote counted, and we must fight for the policies and changes that we need for a better world. We need to look to leadership, to impacted communities, and we need to look to those communities for ideas of how to make change, right? We have to look for survival tips, for strategies, because those are the communities that are going to show us how to create a better world. All right, so thank you all for coming out today to demand that every vote be counted, and for coming out on Saturday to demand that every vote be counted. And I will say this, if you are not in an organization right now, join an organization, whether it's a faith-based organization or a socialist organization or a democratic organization or a radical grassroots affinity group. Just work with the people near you, because we accomplish much more when we work together than we do when we work alone. So I know, because you're here and I saw the beautiful people in Oakland too, that we are going to make this be some kind of victory for us, and that we're going to make the most of that victory. If we elect Mr. Biden tomorrow, we have to make him become the president that we need. All right, and that is when our work begins. All right, so thank you all for being here, and solidarity.
Co-organizer Lawrence Abbott from Move to Amend.
So good evening, everybody. I want to